welcome. My name's Adrian May, and in this short video, I want to briefly introduce you to the writing section of the SAT and the ACT and how I can help you through with this process. Now, the writing section of the exam is one in which you have to correct a series of short essays and identify what kind of errors are there, and they might be errors of grammar, punctuation, structure, or spelling, or word choice. Now, this is my favourite part of the exam to teach because there are only really 9 or 10 question types that you really have to get on top of. Once you know these 9 or 10 categories, you know these rules, then people's improvement in the section tends to be very, very rapid. And it's the section people tend to do very well on, they feel very confident about it, and some students even find it quite fun at the end of this process. So hopefully we'll get there at one point. Now, the topic I just want to introduce today is called modifying or descriptive clauses, and it's a really important one because students who are already quite good at the English language, they're quite good writers, can often get a reasonably high score on the SAT and ACT writing section straight off the bat, but they rarely get 100%, and one thing very few people know about how to use properly is modifying and descriptive clauses. Even myself, when I started this process, I assumed I'd be quite good at this. By this point, I'd already done several degrees, I'd written a book, and so I assumed that I'd be able to do the writing section very, very easily. But there were always 3 or 4 questions that I wouldn't always get right, and I didn't know why. And it turned out it was because my use of modifying and descriptive clauses was not accurate and specific enough. However, once you learn this, your eyes totally open to what's going on, the questions become super clear, and you begin to answer them with complete confidence. And so hopefully by the end of the video, this is one question type that you will be able to deal with in full confidence of your ability. Now, we do use modifying and descriptive clauses all the time in everyday speech, and we generally use them to add extra information to a sentence. So, for example, take the sentence, Alexander Hamilton was killed by Aaron Burr in a duel. Now, this sentence stands alone as it is, it's totally fine, but we might want to add some extra information to say when and where this happened. And we can do that by adding a modifying clause to the start of the sentence. And so we could say, along the banks of the Hudson River on June the 11th, comma, Alexander Hamilton was killed by Aaron Burr in a duel. And now we know when and where this happened. Notice that the modifying clause, along the banks of the Hudson River on June 11th, has to come right next to the noun Alexander Hamilton, because that is the time and date that Alexander Hamilton was killed. So modifying clauses have to come either directly before or directly after the noun that they are describing. They don't, however, have to come at the start of a sentence. So, for example, we could take the sentence, I have recently read Shoshana Zuboff's new book, and I would recommend it to everyone. Now again, this sentence is totally fine as it is, but we might want to add some information as to what this book is about. And if we want to describe the book, we have to add a modifying clause after the noun book. So the sentence could read, I have recently read Shoshana Zuboff's new book, comma, an analysis of the surveillance strategies used by Google and Facebook, comma, and I would recommend it to everyone. And now we've inserted a modifying clause in the middle of the sentence that correctly describes the book and gives us a little bit more information about what's going on. So, the correct placement of modifying clauses is one thing the SAT and ACT might test you on, but also the thing being described has to be described precisely by the modifying clause, and the noun that comes before or after the clause has to again be exactly what is being described. So, to give you an example of this, we could have the sentence, gasping for air and desperate for a break, comma, Mo Farah's legs would hopefully carry him to the end of the race. Now, we kind of get what this is saying. The sentence makes sense, we understand it. However, there is a problem with our use of the modifying clause here, because gasping for air and desperate for a break, is this describing Mo Farah's legs? Or is it describing Mo Farah himself? And it has to be Mo Farah that is gasping for air, and therefore there's something wrong with our modifying clause. However, in this case, it's going to be way easier to change the noun rather than the descriptive clause. So we can correct this, and the sentence should read, gasping for air and desperate for a break, comma, Mo Farah hoped that his legs would carry him to the end of the race. And now our descriptive clause that is describing Mo Farah matches precisely. We've changed the noun to match the clause. So in another example, an ACT question used to have a scenario where there was a woman visiting a hospital and she was walking around the maternity ward and there were loads of babies crying everywhere and the corridor was full of noise. And so the sentence read, walking down the corridor, comma, my ears were assaulted by noise. And again, this sentence kind of makes sense. We know what's being said. There's nothing particularly confusing about this, but when we think about it, is it precise? The descriptive clause is describing something that is walking down the corridor. Well, what is walking down the corridor? Is it the narrator's ears? And obviously, it can't be. It is the narrator herself who is walking down the corridor. And therefore, we need to change the noun so that the sentence reads, walking down the corridor, comma, I was assaulted by noise. Because it's the narrator, the narrative I, that is walking down the corridor and not her ears. So I hope this is beginning to make some kind of sense. What I'm going to do now is provide you with 3 or 4 ACT and SAT questions on the screen. If you want to pause it when I bring up each question, you can then have a think yourself to see if you can figure out what's going on, see if you can get the right answer, and then unpause it, and I will talk you through the solutions to each one of these questions. Okay, you ready? Here's the first one. Okay, so here's our first SAT question. And for those of you unfamiliar with the format, in both the SAT and the ACT, you are presented with sentences like this with an underlined section. And it's this bit you have to decide whether it is right or wrong. And so if you think the underlined section is correct as it is, you can pick A, no change. Or if you pick B, C, and D, you will be replacing the underlined section with either one of those answers to fix the sentence. Now, in the exam, you wouldn't necessarily know straight away that this was a modification question. And so one quick tip to figure out how you would identify this kind of question in the test is our answer choices all have the same information. They have the lion, its teeth, the envelope, and the act of snaring, but the information is jumbled up in different orders. And it's when you get these kind of questions where your answer choices have the same content, but the information is presented in different orders, that you might guess that this is a modification question. So, I'm going to let you pause the video for a few seconds if you want, just to see if you have a go at the question yourself, and then I'll talk you through the answer. Okay, so the first thing we want to do is to figure out what is the modifying clause here. What is the descriptive clause? And if we think about the sentence, we start with approaching a doorway in which it dangles a red envelope filled with green paper money. And this is the clause that's describing something. It is describing a thing that is approaching the doorway. And so the question we have to answer ourselves now is, what is approaching the doorway? As it stands at the minute, it sounds like the lion's teeth are approaching the doorway, because that is the noun that follows the descriptive clause. And the lion's teeth can approach the doorway, but not of their own volition. They're usually carried by the animal itself. It is the lion itself that is approaching the doorway. And so that is why we have to go for answer choice B, which would give us approaching a doorway in which dangles a red envelope filled with green paper money. The lion snares the envelope with its teeth. And now our modifying clause is describing the lion, and those two nouns and clauses are matched up perfectly. So if you picked B, good job. Now let's move on to the next one. And this is a question from the ACT. And again, I'm going to leave you a brief gap here. If you want to pause the video and have a go at the question yourself, please do so. So once more, we need to figure out what is our descriptive or modifying clause in this sentence. And once again, it's at the start of the sentence. We have establishing her own hair care products in the first decade of the 20th century. Well, okay, who or what established their own hair care products range? And we have the pronoun her here, so we know that it has to be a person, and B, it has to be a female person or a female identifying person. And so that's the noun we're going to want following the descriptive clause. As it stands at the minute with no change, we have establishing her own hair care products business in the first decade of the 20th century. Millions of dollars were later bequeathed by Madam C.J. Walker. And because millions of dollars is sitting after our descriptive clause, it feels like it's the dollars that set up the business. But we know that that is not true. It must be the person, and the person here must be Madam C.J. Walker. So we need Madam C.J. Walker to follow our descriptive clause, and that would give us answer choice B, which if we read this out would have establishing her own hair care products business in the first decade of the 20th century, comma, Madam C.J. Walker later bequeathed millions of dollars. And again, our descriptive clause and our noun now match up perfectly. Okay, 2 more. And here we have another one from the SAT. This one, we have an entire sentence that the whole thing needs to be changed. Once again, I'm going to give you a few seconds. Pause the video if you want to have a look at this yourself to start with. So, here we need to figure out what the modifier is that is acting a bit weirdly. And I think if we look at answer choice C, it begins to look clear straight away. Answer choice C gives us another visitor dotted with pin-sized knobs. Notice my fascination with a tiny writing desk and its drawers. And we have to ask ourselves at this point, is it likely that a visitor is going to be dotted with pin-sized knobs? Or is it going to be something else? And we look at answer choice A and B, they also suggest the same thing. Answer choice A, dotted with pin-sized knobs, comma, another visitor. Notice, again, it's the visitor that seems to be dotted with pin-sized knobs. And answer choice B, another visitor, comma, dotted with pin-sized knobs, comma, notice my fascination. Again, it seems to be the visitor that is being dotted with pin-sized knobs in this case. Does that make sense? Outside of the whole passage, it's a little less clear than it might be, but if we look at answer choice D, this might begin to make a bit more sense. Another visitor noticed my fascination with a tiny writing desk and its drawers, comma, dotted with pin-sized knobs. And it would make more sense for a tiny writing desk to be dotted with pin-sized knobs. The drawers of this tiny model desk are going to have little doorknobs on it, and that is the modifying clause that makes sense. It is the drawers that are dotted with knobs, and only answer choice D makes that abundantly clear, whereas A, B, and C makes it seem like a person is dotted with pin-sized knobs, which doesn't really seem to make that much sense. And so to finish with, a last question from the SAT. I include this one because when we're going through the practice test that this question turns up in, a lot of people get this wrong, and they get it wrong because they don't notice that it's a modifying question. They tend to look at the start of the sentence, they try to find a method to make their, or strove for a method, or looked for a method, or sought for a method. Looking down A, B, C, and D, they look at the difference at the start of the answer choices, and that's where they want to try and solve the question. However, I think it's the end of the answer choices you want to look at. I'm going to let you pause the video if you want to have a go at this question yourself. Okay, and so what did you come up with? Where is our modifying clause here? That's the tricky thing. And it's actually, if we look after the underlined section, this bit in parentheses, in brackets, we have fuels derived from once living material. This is our descriptive clause. So descriptive clauses can be separated by brackets or dashes, as well as commas, but they work in exactly the same way. We're adding some additional descriptive material to a sentence, and this added clause has to be right next to the thing it's describing. And so what are fuels derived from once living material? Well, to me, this sounds like a direct definition of biofuels. And so it's the word biofuels we're going to want to have right next to this bracketed clause. Answer choices B and C give us biofuel combustion, open brackets, fuels derived from once living material. That doesn't seem to work. It's not the combustion we're describing, but the biofuels themselves. Whereas answer choice D would give us sought a method to study the combustion of biofuels, open brackets, fuels derived from once living material. And that seems to work much, much better. We have the word biofuels followed by a precise definition of what they are in the modifying clause, and therefore answer choice D has to be the right answer. Congratulations and good job if you got that correct. Okay, so I hope by then those grammar questions were beginning to make a little bit of sense, and also I hope you've got an idea of how I can help you through the process and my teaching style. The next thing is there is a video on my website where I go through an SAT math question, so if you want to go through that as well, please do. And then if you think that I can help you further with your SAT or ACT preparation, please do get in touch. My website is www.adrian-may.com. My contact details are on there. Please do get in touch with any questions or comments that you may have. If you would like to start doing lessons, we can do that in a variety of ways, via Skype or in person. And if you want to just do 1 or 2 lessons, if, for example, you've been doing some practice papers and you just want to help with 1 or 2 questions that aren't working, we can go through that. But also we can put together a series of lessons where we go through the whole of the SAT or ACT syllabus from start to finish over a prolonged period. I'll be happy to help you with that. So please do get in touch if I can help you in any way. I hope you've enjoyed watching, and thanks for listening, and hopefully hear from you soon. Okay, goodbye.